You want to know what real betrayal feels like? Try watching your own flesh and blood destroy everything you've built over 30 years while you're powerless to stop it. After my son's fraud scheme obliterated my investment firm and left me with nothing but legal bills and a ruined reputation, I found myself waiting tables at a greasy diner on the wrong side of town. One morning, this arrogant businessman in a $1,000 suit looked at me like I was dirt under his shoe and made some snide comment about getting financial advice from a waitress. He had no idea he was talking to someone who once managed $2 billion in assets. He had no idea what was about to happen next. If you're watching this story, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you think you know about success, family, and second chances. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because the road from the executive suite to serving coffee and dodging groping customers is paved with more betrayal than you could ever imagine. 3 years ago, I was Margaret Elizabeth Hartwell, CEO and founder of Hartwell Capital Management. I had built that firm from nothing, started in my garage with $5,000 and a dream, worked 18-hour days for 3 decades, sacrificed marriages, friendships. Hell, I missed my own mother's funeral closing a deal that kept us afloat during the 2008 crisis. By 2022, we managed $2.3 billion in assets. I had a corner office on the 42nd floor overlooking Manhattan, a penthouse apartment, and respect in an industry that chews up women and spits them out. My son David was my pride and joy, my chosen successor. Harvard MBA, sharp as a tack, charming enough to sweet talk money out of a stone. I groomed him from the age of 12, taught him everything I knew about reading markets, managing risk, building trust with clients. When he joined the firm at 25, I thought I was looking at the future of Hartwell Capital. God, I was such a fool. The first red flag should have been the lifestyle. David was driving cars I couldn't afford, wearing watches that cost more than most people's salaries, taking vacations to places that would drain a normal person's savings. When I asked him about it, he'd flash that $1 million smile and say he was just good with his personal investments. I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored every instinct screaming in my head. Then came that Tuesday morning in November when the FBI walked into my office. Not politely, not with a warrant they showed me first. They swarmed the place like we were running a drug cartel, seized our computers, our files, froze our accounts, and there I was, standing in my own conference room, watching 20 years of client relationships evaporate as agents and windbreakers carried out boxes of evidence. The scheme was brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its scope. David had been running a classic Ponzi operation, using new client investments to pay returns to existing clients while skimming millions for himself. But he was smart about it. He only targeted the accounts I didn't personally manage, the newer clients who trusted the Hartwell name without needing to meet me face to face. For 2 years, he'd been systematically looting the firm while I was focused on the institutional clients and the big picture strategy. When the dust settled, we'd lost $67 million of client money. 67 million. Retirement funds, college savings, nest eggs that people had spent lifetimes building. The regulatory fines alone were enough to bankrupt us. But when you add in the civil lawsuits and criminal restitution, I lost everything. Everything. My firm, my reputation, my penthouse, my car, even my jewelry. It all went to pay back the people my own son had robbed. You know what's funny about being rich for 30 years? You forget how to be poor. I mean really poor, not, oh, I can't afford the vacation home this year. Poor. I'm talking about checking couch cushions for quarters to do laundry pour. Living in a studio apartment where the bathroom door doesn't close and you can hear your neighbor's TV through walls so thin they might as well be paper. The worst part wasn't the cramped living space or the roaches or the fact that my coffee maker was older than some of my former employees. The worst part was the isolation. 30 years of networking, of charity galas and business lunches and golf club memberships, and suddenly I was invisible. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid me. People I'd considered friends stopped returning calls. The business community in Manhattan has a long memory for scandal and zero tolerance for anyone associated with fraud, even if you were the victim. I applied for jobs. God, did I apply for jobs? Financial advisor positions, consulting roles, anything remotely related to my expertise. But who's going to hire the woman whose company imploded in one of the biggest financial scandals of the year? My resume was toxic. My name was poison. Google my name, and the first 10 results were all about the fraud, the investigation, the trial where I sat in the gallery watching my son get sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. So I ended up at Mickey's Diner on Queens Boulevard, slinging hash and pouring coffee for truckers and insomniacs. The manager, a guy named Ray, who looked like he'd been working food service since the Carter administration, took one look at my application, where I'd tried to downplay my background, and said, "Lady, I don't care if you used to be the Queen of England. Can you carry 3 plates without dropping them and smile when customers are rude to you?" The uniform was polyester and permanently stained with grease. The shoes were from Payless and made my feet feel like I was walking on broken glass. My hands, which used to be manicured weekly and soft as silk, were now cracked and raw from constantly washing dishes and wiping down tables with industrial strength cleaner. I'd come home smelling like bacon grease and disappointment, my back aching from being on my feet for 10 hours straight. But you know what? I learned to make coffee that didn't taste like it was filtered through gym socks. I memorized the difference between over easy and over medium. I figured out which customers tipped well and which ones were going to stiff me, no matter how good the service was. It wasn't dignified work, but it was honest work. And after what my family name had been dragged through, honest felt like a luxury I couldn't afford to take for granted. Then came that morning in March that changed everything. I was working the breakfast shift, dealing with the usual crowd of construction workers and night shift nurses grabbing coffee before heading home. The diner was nearly empty, except for one guy sitting in the corner booth, pecking away at his laptop while his eggs got cold. He was maybe 45, expensive suit even at 7 in the morning, the kind of perfectly groomed appearance that screamed corporate executive. Gold watch, Italian leather briefcase, shoes that probably cost more than I made in a month. Everything about him radiated success and privilege, and something about his presence made my skin crawl with memories of who I used to be. I'd refilled his coffee 3 times without him saying a word, just grunting acknowledgement while he stared at whatever financial reports were on his screen. But when I came by for the fourth refill, he looked up at me with this expression of absolute disdain, like I was something unpleasant he'd scraped off his shoe. "You know," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I've been watching you work, and you seem more competent than the usual waitress. You actually know how to handle yourself professionally." He leaned back in the booth, studying me like I was a specimen under a microscope. "Tell me something. You ever think about getting into a real career? Maybe finance? I bet you could give me some great investment advice." Then he laughed, this cruel, mocking sound that made my blood boil. I stood there holding that coffee pot, feeling 30 years of expertise and accomplishment reduced to a punchline for this arrogant bastard's entertainment. My hands were shaking with rage, but I kept my voice level and professional. I appreciate the career advice, sir. Is there anything else I can get you this morning? But he wasn't done. Seriously, though, he continued, I'm always looking for fresh perspectives on market strategy. Maybe you could tell me whether I should diversify my portfolio or go all in on tech stocks. I'm sure you have lots of insights from your extensive experience in. He gestured at my uniform. Customer service. That's when something inside me snapped. Not visibly. I was too well trained for that. But something fundamental shifted. I looked at this man who thought he was so superior, so clever, and I made a decision that would change both of our lives. Actually, I said, setting down the coffee pot and pulling a napkin from my apron, I do have some thoughts on your portfolio. I grabbed a pen from behind the register and started sketching out a basic risk assessment matrix on the napkin. Based on current market volatility and the fact that you're clearly in a high income bracket, I'd recommend a balanced approach, maybe 60% equities, 30% bonds, 10% alternative investments. But you'd want to consider your time horizon and risk tolerance first. His smirk faded as he watched me draw out the chart, adding notes about sector rotation and correlation coefficients. When I finished, I slid the napkin across the table and looked him dead in the eye. Of course, I said, my voice steady as stone. What do I know? I'm just a waitress. The change in his expression was immediate and profound. The arrogance melted away, replaced by confusion, then curiosity, then something approaching respect. He picked up the napkin and studied it carefully, his eyes moving back and forth between the diagram and my face. This is, this is actually sophisticated analysis, he said slowly. Where did you learn to do this? I could have walked away then, could have left him wondering and gone back to refilling coffee cups and pretending my past didn't exist. But I was tired of hiding, tired of being invisible, tired of letting my son's crimes erase 3 decades of legitimate accomplishment. I used to run an investment firm, I said simply, before my world imploded. He stared at me for a long moment, then closed his laptop and gave me his full attention. What firm? Hartwell Capital Management. I watched his eyes widen with recognition. Yeah, that Hartwell. The one your business magazines probably covered when it all fell apart. Margaret Hartwell. It wasn't a question. Jesus Christ, you're Margaret Hartwell. I remember reading about the case. Your son. My son destroyed everything I spent 30 years building. I finished for him. Stole millions from clients, destroyed lives, and left me holding the bag. So here I am, serving coffee to people who think they're better than me because they've never had their entire world ripped away by someone they loved unconditionally. He sat back in the booth, studying me with new eyes. I'm sorry, I had no idea. I was completely out of line with those comments. Yes, you were. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. But you're not the first person to assume that someone in a service job couldn't possibly understand complex financial concepts. People see the uniform and think they know everything about you. My name is James Mitchell, he said, extending his hand across the table. I run a consulting firm. We help struggling businesses restructure and recover, and I think I may have just met exactly the person I've been looking for. I shook his hand, but kept my expression neutral. What do you mean? I mean, I've got a client who's drowning in debt and bad decisions, and nothing my team has suggested has worked. Maybe what they need isn't another Harvard MBA with a cookie-cutter approach. Maybe they need someone who's actually been through hell and found a way to survive. He pulled out his business card and slid it across the table. Would you be interested in consulting on a case? It's a small manufacturing company, family owned, on the verge of bankruptcy. The owner is desperate enough to try anything at this point. I looked at the card, then at him. You want to hire a disgraced former CEO who's waiting tables to save someone's business? I want to hire someone who understands what it's like to lose everything and keep fighting anyway, he said. Someone who's learned humility the hard way, but hasn't lost their expertise. That combination is rarer than you might think. I tucked the card into my apron pocket. I get off at 3. If you're serious about this, come back then, and we'll talk details. He nodded, left a $20 tip on an $8 check, and walked out of the diner. I watched him through the window as he got into a black BMW and drove away, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something I'd forgotten existed. Hope. James came back at 3:15, just as I was hanging up my apron and switching from my work shoes to the slightly less uncomfortable sneakers I wore for the walk home. We drove to his office in Midtown, a sleek suite of glass and steel that reminded me painfully of what I'd lost, but also of what I was capable of achieving. The client was a company called Peterson Manufacturing, a third-generation family business that made specialized components for the aerospace industry. The numbers were ugly: $3 million in debt, declining revenue, outdated equipment, and a workforce that hadn't seen a raise in 4 years. The owner, Robert Peterson, was a decent man in his 60s who'd inherited the company from his father and watched it slowly bleed to death despite his best efforts. When James introduced me as a consultant, Peterson looked skeptical. No offense, lady, but I've already paid 3 different consulting firms to tell me things I already knew. What makes you different? Because I've been where you are, I told him. I've sat in that chair, wondering how everything went so wrong so fast. I've felt the weight of responsibility for other people's livelihoods crushing down on me, and I've learned some hard lessons about what it takes to survive when everything seems hopeless. Over the next 2 weeks, I dove into Peterson Manufacturing's books with the intensity of a woman who had nothing left to lose. I spent 16-hour days analyzing cash flow, supply chains, customer relationships, and operational efficiency. I interviewed employees, suppliers, and customers. I crawled through the factory floor in my good clothes, getting my hands dirty and learning every aspect of their business. What I found wasn't just financial mismanagement. It was a company that had lost its way. They were trying to compete on price in a market where quality and innovation were the real differentiators. They were spending money on the wrong things and ignoring investments that could have transformed their competitive position. Most importantly, they weren't communicating with their customers about what those customers actually needed. My recommendations weren't revolutionary, but they were comprehensive and grounded in real understanding of the business. We needed to consolidate their product lines, invest in modern equipment, restructure their debt, and most critically, shift their business model from commodity manufacturing to customized solutions. It meant layoffs in some areas, but new hiring in others. It meant short-term pain for long-term survival. Peterson listened to my presentation with growing excitement. "This makes sense," he kept saying. "This actually makes sense. But can we actually pull it off?" "Not without taking some major risks," I admitted. "You're going to have to mortgage everything you own and bet it all on this strategy working. If it fails, you'll lose the company anyway. But at least you'll know you tried something different instead of just managing a slow decline." That's when James spoke up. "What if you had help implementing this? Someone who could work with you day to day to make sure the strategy gets executed properly?" Peterson looked at me. You mean you'd stay on? Not just as a consultant, but as someone actually running this turnaround? I thought about my studio apartment, my waitressing job, my life of invisible desperation. Then I thought about the thrill I'd felt analyzing their business, the familiar rush of seeing patterns and solutions that others had missed. If you're serious about this, if you're really willing to make the hard choices necessary to save this company, then yes, I'll see it through with you. That handshake changed everything. Over the next 18 months, I practically lived at Peterson Manufacturing. I negotiated with creditors, redesigned their production processes, hired new engineers, and personally called every major customer to understand their needs and rebuild relationships. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and terrifying all at once. The hardest part wasn't the technical challenges, it was dealing with the emotional weight of other people's trust. These employees, these customers, Robert Peterson himself, they were betting their futures on my ability to succeed where others had failed. Every decision I made could mean the difference between saving jobs and destroying them. The pressure was immense, but it was also familiar. It reminded me why I'd loved building my own company in the first place. James was there through all of it, providing resources and support, but also challenging my decisions when he thought I was wrong. We developed a working relationship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to results. He'd seen me at my lowest point and chosen to bet on my ability to recover. That kind of faith, especially from someone who barely knew me, was both humbling and motivating. By the end of the first year, Peterson Manufacturing was profitable again. By the end of the second year, they were growing. We'd cut costs by 30% while increasing revenue by 40%. More importantly, we'd created a sustainable business model that could thrive in changing market conditions. Robert Peterson went from facing bankruptcy to considering expansion into new markets. But the real transformation was in me, working with my hands again, solving real problems for real people, proving that my skills and experience still had value. It rebuilt something inside me that I'd thought was permanently broken. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was contributing, leading, making a difference in ways that mattered. Just when everything seemed to be falling into place, just when I was starting to believe that maybe I could rebuild some version of the life I'd lost, the past came roaring back with a vengeance. It started with strange calls to my apartment, hang-ups mostly, but occasionally someone would stay on the line long enough for me to hear breathing before disconnecting. Then my mail started getting tampered with, envelopes that had clearly been opened and resealed. Someone was watching me, following me, and I had no idea why. The answer came in the form of a visit from FBI agent Sarah Chen, the same agent who'd led the investigation into Hartwell Capital Management. She showed up at Peterson Manufacturing on a Tuesday afternoon, flashing her badge and asking to speak with me privately. "We need to talk, Margaret, about your son's case." My blood went cold. David's been in federal prison for 2 years. What could you possibly need to discuss? "We've been investigating some irregularities in the original case, evidence that suggests your son might not have been acting alone." She led me to a conference room and spread out files I recognized from my own nightmare. Bank records, transaction logs, correspondence that had been evidence in David's trial. But there were new documents I'd never seen before. Communications between David and someone identified only as JM in the records. "We've been tracking money that we couldn't account for in the original investigation," Agent Chen explained. "Payments that went beyond David's personal expenses, transfers that suggest he was working with a partner, someone who helped him identify targets, someone with access to information about potential clients." I stared at the documents, my mind racing. You think there was someone else involved in the scheme? Someone who helped David choose which accounts to target? We think there was someone who fed him information about wealthy individuals looking for investment opportunities, someone with connections in the business community who could steer clients toward Hartwell Capital Management specifically. As she talked, a horrible possibility began forming in my mind. The timing of David's success in attracting new clients, the way he always seemed to know exactly which prospects would be most receptive to his pitch, the lifestyle he was living that exceeded even what he was stealing from the firm. Agent Chen, I said slowly. What do the initials JM stand for? She looked at me carefully. We're not certain yet, but we have reason to believe it's someone you know, someone who's been in contact with you recently. The room seemed to spin around me. James Mitchell, JM, the man who'd found me in that diner, who'd offered me a second chance, who'd been there through every step of my recovery. The man I'd started to trust, maybe even care about. There's more, Agent Chen continued. We believe this person may have orchestrated your downfall specifically to position themselves to approach you later. Think about it. You're ruined professionally, desperate for work, grateful for any opportunity. You'd be unlikely to ask too many questions about someone offering you a lifeline. I thought about that morning in the diner, how perfectly James had played the arrogant businessman, how his insults had been designed to provoke exactly the response they got. How convenient it was that he happened to have a client who needed exactly my expertise. How he'd pushed for me to take a hands-on role instead of just consulting from a distance. What does he want from me? I whispered. We're not sure yet, but Peterson Manufacturing handles contracts for several defense contractors. If someone wanted access to classified information or wanted to position themselves to bid on lucrative government contracts, having an inside person at a company like Peterson's would be extremely valuable. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd been through, after finally finding something that felt like redemption, it was all just another layer of manipulation. Someone else using me, lying to me, positioning me like a chess piece in a game I didn't even know I was playing. What do you need me to do? I asked. We need you to act normal. Continue working with him. Continue the relationship, but document everything. We're going to give you a recording device. If he reveals anything about his involvement with your son or his plans for Peterson Manufacturing, we need it on tape. Agent Chen handed me a device no bigger than a thumb drive. This records automatically whenever it detects conversation. Keep it with you at all times when you're around him. I took the device, feeling its weight like a stone in my palm. How long have you known about this? We've been building the case for 6 months. I'm sorry we couldn't warn you sooner, but we needed to see how far he was willing to go. So, everything I've accomplished at Peterson Manufacturing, everything I thought I'd rebuilt, it's all been part of someone else's scheme? Agent Chen's expression softened. Margaret, what you've accomplished at Peterson's is real. You genuinely saved that company and those jobs. Whatever James Mitchell's motivations were, your work stands on its own merit. Don't let anyone take that away from you. The confrontation came 3 weeks later, during what I thought was a routine meeting about expanding Peterson Manufacturing's client base. James had arranged a presentation for potential investors, a room full of well-dressed people who claimed to represent various investment funds interested in supporting our growth. But as I sat in that conference room, watching James work the crowd with practiced charm, I noticed things I'd missed before. The way he steered conversations away from certain topics, the way he seemed to know more about Peterson's contracts than he should have, The way some of his questions probed for information that had nothing to do with investment decisions. When he asked me to present our financial projections, I activated the recording device Agent Chen had given me and started talking. But instead of sticking to the prepared presentation, I began weaving in details about our defense contracts, our security protocols, our upcoming bids on classified projects. Information that would be incredibly valuable to the wrong people. James's eyes lit up. After the meeting, he pulled me aside, his excitement barely contained. Margaret, that was brilliant. The way you handled their questions about the defense contracts, you gave them exactly what they needed to understand the real value of this investment. I thought that's what you wanted, I said carefully. You kept emphasizing how important it was to show them the full scope of our business relationships. Absolutely. And the security information you mentioned, the protocols for handling classified materials, that was perfect context for understanding how we manage risk. He was practically glowing with satisfaction, and I realized he thought he'd successfully manipulated me into revealing exactly what he'd been after all along. The recording device in my pocket felt like it was burning a hole through my clothes. James, I said, can I ask you something? How did you really know to find me at that diner? I mean, what are the odds that someone with your connections would just happen to stumble across Margaret Hartwell serving coffee in Queens? His smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. I told you I was looking for someone with real experience, someone who understood failure and recovery. When I heard through the grapevine that you were working there, I had to see for myself. Through the grapevine? From who? Does it matter? The important thing is we found each other and look what we've accomplished together. It matters to me because I'm starting to think our meeting wasn't as coincidental as you made it seem. Now his expression hardened. Margaret, I don't like what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, James. I'm asking directly. Did you know my son? Did you have any involvement in what happened at Hartwell Capital Management? The mask finally slipped. The friendly, supportive business partner disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. You're asking the wrong questions, Margaret. The question you should be asking is what happens to Peterson Manufacturing if you start making accusations you can't prove. Is that a threat? It's a reality check. You think you've rebuilt your life, but everything you have depends on my goodwill. The consulting contract, the client relationships, even your reputation in this industry. I control all of it. Push me, and you'll find yourself right back where I found you, serving coffee and wondering what went wrong. You son of a bitch. The words came out low and deadly. You were working with David all along, weren't you? You helped him identify targets, helped him run the scheme, and when it all fell apart, you positioned yourself to profit from the aftermath. Your son was an amateur, James said with disgust. Sloppy, greedy, too eager for the lifestyle to be careful about covering his tracks. I tried to keep him disciplined, but he got reckless. When the FBI started closing in, I made sure they'd find exactly what they needed to convict him and close the case. You let him take the fall for everything while you walked away clean. I let him take the fall for his mistakes while I salvaged what I could from a bad situation. And then I waited for the right moment to approach you, to put you in a position where you could be useful to me again. The rage building inside me was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This man had orchestrated my son's downfall, destroyed my company, ruined my life, and then manipulated me into trusting him. He'd taken everything from me and then pretended to give me back a small piece of it so he could use me again. The defense contracts, I said. That's what you're really after. You want to use Peterson Manufacturing as a way to get access to classified information. I want to use Peterson Manufacturing as a legitimate front for activities that generate significant returns for my real clients. What you've built there is perfect for my purposes. Respected, trusted, with access to exactly the kind of information that certain parties are willing to pay handsomely for. And if I refuse to cooperate, then Peterson Manufacturing faces some unfortunate setbacks. Contracts get canceled, financing gets pulled, key employees receive better offers elsewhere. Robert Peterson finds himself right back where he started, except this time without the benefit of your expertise to guide him through bankruptcy. I looked at this man who had systematically destroyed everything I cared about and felt something crystallize inside me. You know what your mistake was, James? Enlighten me. I pulled the recording device from my pocket and held it up so he could see it clearly. You assumed I was still the same person you manipulated 2 years ago. You assumed I was still desperate enough to let someone else control my life. His face went white as he realized what he was looking at. You're wearing a wire. I'm wearing a recording device provided by FBI agent Sarah Chen, who's been building a case against you for months. Everything you just confessed to is documented evidence that's going to put you in federal prison for a very long time. The conference room door burst open, and Agent Chen walked in with two other agents, their badges displayed and handcuffs ready. James Mitchell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit espionage. As they read him his rights and cuffed him, James looked at me with pure hatred. You think you've won something here? You think this changes anything? You're still the woman whose son destroyed her company. You're still damaged goods in this industry. I stood up and looked him straight in the eye. Maybe, but I'm also the woman who just helped the FBI take down a criminal enterprise. I'm the woman who saved Peterson Manufacturing and 67 jobs. I'm the woman who survived the worst betrayal imaginable and came out stronger on the other side. As they led him away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: vindication. Not just the satisfaction of seeing justice done, but the deeper knowledge that I had the strength to face whatever came next. That was 8 months ago. James Mitchell pled guilty to 17 federal charges and received a 25-year sentence. The investigation revealed the full scope of his operation. He'd been running similar schemes for over a decade, using desperate or vulnerable business people as unwitting accomplices in industrial espionage and financial fraud. My son David's sentence was reduced to 8 years in exchange for his testimony about James's role in the original scheme. Peterson Manufacturing continues to thrive. Robert Peterson offered me a permanent position as Chief Financial Officer, with an equity stake and a salary that's allowing me to rebuild my financial life. More importantly, I wake up every morning knowing that my work matters, that I'm contributing something valuable to the world instead of just surviving day by day. I still live modestly. The studio apartment has been replaced by a small one-bedroom, but I'm not interested in returning to the lifestyle that made me a target in the first place. I've learned that respect has to be earned through actions, not accumulated through possessions. I've learned that resilience isn't about avoiding failure. It's about finding the strength to keep going after failure has stripped away everything you thought defined you. My relationship with David is slowly healing. I visit him every month, and we're working through the anger and betrayal with the help of a counselor. He's genuinely remorseful about what he did, not just sorry he got caught, and he's using his time in prison to get an education in addiction counseling. He wants to help other people avoid the mistakes that destroyed our family. The business community's attitude toward me has shifted as well. Word got out about my role in the FBI investigation, about what I accomplished at Peterson Manufacturing, about the fact that I was a victim of the original fraud rather than a participant. I've started receiving calls from headhunters, offers to consult on other turnaround situations, invitations to speak at conferences about corporate resilience and recovery. But the most important thing I've learned is this: your worst moment doesn't have to define your entire story. The people who wrote me off after the Hartwell Capital Management scandal saw only the failure, only the association with fraud and ruin. They couldn't see the person underneath who had built something meaningful once and could build again. Sometimes the greatest gift someone can give you is underestimating you. That arrogant businessman in the diner thought he was mocking someone powerless, someone whose opinions didn't matter. He had no idea he was talking to someone who had survived the destruction of everything she'd worked for and was quietly building the strength to try again. His condescension became the catalyst for my redemption. Everyone faces moments when life seems determined to crush you, when the people you love most betray you, when everything you've worked for disappears overnight. In those moments, you have a choice. You can surrender to the narrative that you're finished, that your best days are behind you, that you deserve whatever punishment life is dealing out. Or you can decide that this is just one chapter in a longer story, that you still have something valuable to offer the world, that your experience, even your failures, can become sources of strength rather than shame. I chose to keep fighting. I chose to believe that my expertise still had value, that my experience could help other people facing similar challenges, that my story wasn't over just because I'd hit the lowest point I'd ever imagined possible. And you know what? I was right. The skills that built Hartwell Capital Management were still there, refined by humility and strengthened by adversity. The ability to see patterns, to solve problems, to lead people through difficult situations, none of that disappeared when my world fell apart. It just got buried under grief and shame and the exhaustion of trying to survive day by day. If you're going through your own version of hell right now, if someone you trusted has betrayed you, if your carefully constructed life has imploded and you're wondering how you'll ever recover, I want you to remember something. This is not the end of your story. This is the part where you discover what you're really made of. This is where you learn that you're stronger than you knew, more resilient than you imagined, more valuable than the people who wrote you off could ever understand. Don't let anyone convince you that your past mistakes or the mistakes of people you loved define your future possibilities. Don't let anyone tell you that you're too old, too damaged, too associated with failure to contribute something meaningful to the world. And most importantly, don't let anyone convince you to accept a smaller life than you're capable of living. The road back is longer and harder than you want it to be. There will be days when you question whether the effort is worth it, when the comfortable numbness of giving up seems preferable to the painful work of rebuilding. But I promise you this: the person you become through that process, the strength you develop, the clarity you gain about what really matters, those things are worth every moment of struggle. 3 years ago, I thought my life was over. I thought the best I could hope for was to fade into invisibility and try not to cause any more damage. Today, I'm helping other companies avoid the mistakes that destroyed mine. I'm contributing to my community. I'm rebuilding relationships with the people who matter most. And I'm sharing my story with people like you who might need to hear that recovery is possible, that redemption is available, that your worst chapter doesn't have to be your final chapter. So, if you're watching this from your own version of rock bottom, if you're wondering whether you have the strength to try again, Let me tell you something that took me 2 years of serving coffee and getting dismissed as irrelevant to fully understand. You are not finished. Your experience, your knowledge, your unique perspective on the world. These things have value that can't be destroyed by failure or betrayal or other people's opinions about who you are. The question isn't whether you can recover from this. The question is what kind of person you want to be on the other side of recovery. Because I promise you, if you keep fighting, if you refuse to accept defeat as permanent, you will get to the other side. And the person you become through that journey will be capable of things you can't even imagine right now. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for believing that second chances are possible, that people can change, that our worst moments can become the foundation for our greatest triumphs. And if my experience helps even one person find the strength to keep going when everything seems hopeless, then every moment of pain and struggle and humiliation was worth it. Your story isn't over. In fact, the best part might just be beginning.